Joining us today, we have Dr. Jody Stanislaw, who has lived with type 1 diabetes since 1980. And she has done some extensive traveling and had set out in fall of this past year to do a year of traveling to different countries every month. And we'll get to hear a little bit about how those plans shifted when she shares later. And she also owns her own telemedicine practice where she works with others living with T1D. And I believe you're still offering a conference of your own that you do. Forgive me, where it's located.
Well, before COVID, before I left the country, the past 3 years, did I do one last year, Joe? I've done three 3-day retreats in Sun Valley,
That's
Idaho.
right.
But the next one will probably be in Hawaii. But
wonderful.
I've not made plans for that one yet.
Okay. And then joining us also is Andrea, Andee, or if you know her from Camp Leo, you may know her as Lala Williams. She has a handful of names,
yes.
But
I think I earned Princess Insulin this year too, because I wore the ball gown.
That's excellent.
Nice.
Of insulin.
Yes. Nice. I remember that. Oh, that was lovely. Okay, I love it. And Andee has lived with type 1 diabetes for 11 years. Her mother also lives with type 1 diabetes. And one boring fact about Andee is that she is a huge fan of Formula One racing, which I did not know. So that's really interesting. And her travel has been a lot of backcountry and remote travel and camping. So it'll be great to hear the different perspectives on the types of travel that you all do. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jody Stanislaw, and she's going to start us out today.
All right, great. Well, I'm not running on all cylinders. It's a little early for me right now. It's 6 a.m. where I am, but I've traveled quite a lot. I've lived in probably 10 different countries, and I have backpacked around Australia by myself, Europe by myself. I lived in Thailand. I've lived in Italy twice. And last year I was supposed to be in a new country every month for a year. And I work virtually because I do telemedicine consulting for everybody with type 1. So I've been doing this Zoom world already for 5 years and helping type 1s all over the world, which is so fun. I have patients in probably 15 or 20 different countries. Most of my patients are in the US, but so it allows me to travel very easily. So I can really live anywhere, anytime. And so last year I decided to sign up for this year-long work abroad program where I was scheduled to travel with 30 other people that have jobs that allow them to travel and work remotely. And we all met in Croatia on October 1st. And then we were scheduled to have 4 months in Europe, 4 months in Asia, and 4 months in South America, which was supposed to end last month, September of this year, of course, because I left Seattle September 2019. So it was beautiful. I went to Croatia. I went to Lisbon, Portugal. We lived in Valencia, Spain in December. We lived in Cape Town, South Africa in January, and then Vietnam in February, which of course was starting to get dicey. Then I went to India by myself in early March. And then obviously I had to get out of Asia and come home, but I wasn't quite ready to come home yet. I was still loving the tropical world. And so I decided to come to Hawaii, and now I haven't left Hawaii. So I've lived here now 6 months. But how did I prepare? A lot of people ask me that. To be honest, I thought it was pretty easy. I took I took over a year's worth of insulin. I don't use a pump. So I had, I only use about 1 Humalog pen a month. So I think I took probably, and then I use even less Levemir pens each month. So I took, I believe probably 15 Humalog pens and 15 Levemir pens, and I carried them with me everywhere I went. Well, no, that's not true. I obviously kept them in the fridge all the time. And then on transition day, I would just keep them in my purse. Obviously, I wouldn't check them. And at first, I did try to fight having them go through the X-ray. Even though I've been putting insulin through the X-ray my whole life, I don't know. Sometimes people say, "Oh, you shouldn't do that," and I just was like, "Well, I'll try to keep them out of the X-ray." But then, after going to as many airports as I did, I just finally gave in because they were giving me such a hard time about it. And at one day when I was really feeling like I can't put my year's worth of insulin through the X-ray, I probably stood there for a half an hour until they got all their official people to try to, like, I don't remember what they had to sign a paper or do a pat down or something. And I was like, you know what, this is not worth it. I'm just going to put it through the X-ray. And obviously it's fine. You know, I think it's, if you've heard that you can't put the insulin through the X-ray, I've been putting insulin through X-rays my whole life. But when I had a whole year's worth with no easy way to, you know, to refill them, I got a little bit more defensive about it, but then I let that go. Obviously took a whole bunch of needles. And then the biggest thing was, of course, the Dexcom inserters, because the G6 ones are so big.
So big.
And so I'm like, am I really going to take 36, you know, inserters? Well, you know, hopefully you guys have learned how to make a 10-day cycle last 20 days, right? You pop out the transmitter, you wait 30 minutes, you put it back in. So I actually only brought, I didn't bring 36 inserters with me because, number one, I knew I could extend the 10-day. And number two, I wasn't willing to bring 36 when I could just bring a whole bunch of strips. So I brought, it was still pretty amazing. Instead of having to bring however many hundreds of strips I'd travel with my whole life, I think I brought like 300 or 400 strips or something like that. And because I'd lived in Thailand before, I knew that there's type 1s everywhere, and which means there's strips everywhere, you know. And I did bring, of course, prescriptions, written out prescriptions with everything I needed, needles, insulin, and that was it. Like, people think they can't wrap their head around what I did. And I said, well, I brought, you know, a year plus of insulin, rapid and long acting. I brought, you know, a few hundred needles. And then I brought some Dex supplies and my prescriptions. And, you know, we here in America, we have such a complicated medical system. And then, you know, we have to jump through all these hoops to get what we need. But actually, it's not like that. You know, I could have walked in. I went into a pharmacy in South Africa and I said, let's say I was out of insulin. Can I just buy some insulin? And it was law for them. They could not deny me insulin, even if I didn't have a prescription. I could just walk in there and say, I need Humalog. I have type 1. And they would have sold it to me for like $45. So there's insulin all over the world. There's strips all over the world. And I was always in major cities. I was never, you know, I wasn't remote, which what Andee's going to talk about. But major cities will always have diabetes supplies, and they don't, you know, like I said, they don't have the same restrictions or price, you know, hikes that we have. So I didn't even try to get supplies. I tried to go to some diabetes centers. But then, to be honest, I just got so into traveling, I didn't go to diabetes centers anymore. But I still have, you know, 6 of the Levemir pens with me. They're all expired, but I've never found that expired insulin is a problem. I had free prescriptions on an insurance plan I had probably 3 years ago. And so I had my, okay, there's my Dex. I had, doing my Dawn phenomenon spike right now. I had an insurance plan that allowed me to, you know, get as much insulin as I wanted for free. And I am self-employed, so I don't have a good insurance plan, but back then I did. And so, of course, I had my doctor write that I took like 75 units of insulin a day, which is, of course, not true. But it allowed me to get, you know, a box or 2 of pens for free every month. And that was 3 years ago. And so I still have that stock. But now I am getting, Lilly did, or was it Novo? No, I think it was Lilly did a COVID special for people that didn't have insurance. They're still running through the end of December. And so I bought Now I'm getting a box of Humalog pens for $30 a month. And I've gotten those since June. And then when that runs out, there's a pharmacy in Canada that I buy my insulin from. And it's only like $120 for a box of 5 pens. So I find travel to be fascinating and wonderful. And I'm here because I want to inspire as many type 1s as possible to like, don't let diabetes ever stop you from traveling. Like, it's really easy. Yeah. And then of course I brought glucose tabs, but obviously there's plenty of replacements for that if you don't have glucose tabs.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Andee.
Awesome. Hello to the crowd in the back. I believe maybe watching Frozen, which is also a movie I love. Yes, Catherine shaking her head. Well, hi everyone. My name's Andrea, or my friends call me Andee, or if you know me from camp, it's Lala. I've been at Camp Leo for 4 years. I've been the arts and crafts teacher and the assistant director at elementary school and middle school. So hello to any of my campers out there. It's great to be here talking about traveling with T1D. I loved what Jody said. She really wants to inspire other T1Ds to travel. That is, I cannot tell you enough. I love traveling. My traveling has been not as far and wide as Jody's, but more here locally, but a lot in the kind of backcountry and hiking. I spend many of my weekends all through the year. I'm located in Seattle, so I will hike in the rain even. Some people are like, no way, but I will. I'll pack on the layers and I'll go see. So a lot of my weekends are spent like, oh, where are you hiking this weekend is always what I get asked in Friday meetings. So, but I've never, I actually got into hiking, maybe I moved to Seattle about 8 years ago, and I probably got into hiking about 6 years ago. But I've had type 1 since I was 20. I'm 31 now, so I've had T1D for about 11 years. And my mom also has type 1 diabetes. My mom was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes after me, though, at the age of 57. I'll never forget the day when she called me and she was like, guess what? I have type 1 diabetes too. And so I have a special bond with my mom, definitely. It's always when we do travel together as a family, it's who has better low blood sugar supplies. That's always kind of a joke. So with us, but of course, going out into remote areas, it takes a lot of preparation because you can't tap on a tree and get insulin out of it. If only. So what for me, it does take a lot of prep, but it's not as overwhelming as you might think because, oh, hello there. So it's not as overwhelming as you think. I live by my diabetes checklist when I am going hiking or backpacking. So a couple of the things that I do to prepare is for sure carrying lots of insulin, but also because I am also actively moving all of the time, I always have quick acting sugar with me. So something in terms of, I am not a glucose tab person. I can't remember the last time I consumed a glucose tab. It probably wasn't by choice. I'm big on the glucose gels. I carry a bunch of those in all my backpacks. They're usually in my quick grab pockets, or I always have leggings with pockets in them. And another fun trick that I actually learned from another backpacker is when I'm just kind of moving along, my blood sugar is not low yet, but it might go low in a little while. I carry pixie sticks with me because they're fun to eat also, and they're just kind of a very lightweight way to carry a little bit of sugar. That's kind of the biggest trick with backpacking, is keeping everything very lightweight and minimal space. So yes, those Dexcom G6 sensor insertions are the bane of my existence. So they are the worst when I am backpacking. I am not gonna lie. But a lot of people ask me, oh, how do you keep your insulin cold? Like, what do you do in case of an emergency when you're out there? One of the probably coolest backpacking trips I've ever been on. If you're from Washington, you might have heard, or Pacific Northwest, you might have heard of an area called the Enchantments. It is a permitted backpacking area that you have to enter a lottery system to even backpack through it. You can do the hike to Kolchak or do a through hike of the Enchantments. I will just preemptively warn you, do your research. The Instagram pictures make it look real pretty, but it is really hard. And people can get in trouble up there. It definitely is not for the faint of heart. It is the hardest hike I have ever done. And one day, due to getting lost, I definitely had to hike 26 miles in one day that I was not prepped for. Physically, it hurt. So, and also I'll get into that about having certain glucose emergencies in that trip. I know we have a question later about have you ever been in a situation where things were a little tight? I have, but we can address that later because I'm sure Jody also might have some stories. But a couple of the things that I always do to prepare, one of the quick hacks is the pixie sticks, the glucose gels, always having them quick access. With my insulin, because I don't have a refrigerator out there, one of the things that I always do is when I'm carrying a water pack with me, I keep my insulin in the sleeve where my water is, and I try to keep my water as cold as possible. When I'm going through the backcountry, such as the Enchantments, all the lakes are very cold. So keeping my insulin cold is fairly easy in that regard. But I carry a little supply pack that is quick grab. I actually put it here. I have very quick grab. This is a little Le Sport sack bag that is quick grab that's just legit tucked into my side pocket. So I can always get to my meter, my insulin. And just so you know kind of what therapy I'm on, I also use pens. I find that traveling with pens is very easy. For me, I used to be on an insulin pump. And then actually when I was packing my first backpack, I was like, this is so frustrating with all my pump supplies. And I switched to pens actually before my trip. I was like, I can't do this. So I was on pens for like 5 years before I was on a pump. So I was used to pen therapy. And I use the N pen with Humalog, and then I use Tresiba. And one of the things that I always carry extra supplies with me. I leave supplies at camp as well in case I lose my little pack, because you kind of are on cliff sides sometimes and things fall out. The other thing that I do is I actually always make sure somebody with me has some emergency supplies. So I will always have a glucagon. I use the Basquimi, the inhalable glucagon. And I always have one, but I always make sure someone with me also has one, knows how to use it. Usually I backpack with a group of about 6 people. Sometimes I hike with just one other person, sometimes a little bit bigger of a group, but I always make sure that somebody there in my group knows how to use the glucagon, knows the symptoms, is constantly like in check, like, hey, checking in, like, hey, you good? You know? Most of the people that I have hiked with and backpacked with are very familiar that I have type 1 diabetes. So if they see me like rummaging for some fruit snacks, they're like, hey, check it out, good. And we'll often have that kind of, rapport that's really nice. I think it's really important when you're traveling in the remote areas to make sure that somebody else knows what's up. Like that is the best education. And most people would just rather you tell them than not tell them. The other thing that for me that is important is when I'm backpacking is having one of the emergency like Garmin GPS trackers. This is someone in my group. I don't have the one. I'm lucky to have a friend who they are expensive. Luckily they've made that investment and I haven't had to. But we always have a GPS emergency tracker with us. So if there was an emergency, not even for just my type 1 diabetes, for any kind of emergency out in that remote area, that you can page someone, especially in like a place like the Enchantments where you could only get airlifted because of how high up it is, if they can get there. That's something really important to have. And then the other thing that people often ask me about is how do I get fresh water? That's kind of a cool general backpacking question. They make filtered water bottles called Life Straws. I highly suggest getting one of those if you're in the remote area. We all know with T1D, sometimes when the blood sugars are going up and down, that we need water. It's really, really important to hydrate, of course, when you're out there. I've been out there in July and August where it can be super hot. Not when you get up that high, but when you're hiking up there, it's hot in the sun. So it's really important to have those water bottles. And the Life Straws are just a great investment to have on any hike. Anytime that you're near the water, I carry one at all times on any hike. So, but I do see a question in the chat about someone asking about going back on the pump when not traveling. I can answer. Do you want me to answer that right now? Yeah. Okay. So actually I intended to go back on the pump and then really liked having the freedom of my pens, because I do backpack. So I backpack or hike so often. And I worked with my endocrinologist. And when I originally started doing a lot of backpacking, I was on Lantus. And that was kind of that I have had some trouble with Lantus with my exercise. So that is why I switched to Tresiba. And that is actually, just to touch on that, that's another interesting thing about the type of traveling that I do with backpacking is working out your basal insulin when you're traveling, because you have to, for me, Tresiba lasts over 3 days. So I actually have to start reducing my basal leading up to the hardest part of my hike. So usually the first day of hiking, of backpacking is the longest and the hardest. So carrying a 40-pound pack, which is full of glucose gels. I always have the heaviest pack because it's full of glucose gels. That's kind of the joke in my group, is that I have the heaviest pack. So yeah, I usually start to reduce my Tresiba about 3 days before, and I do it like 10% one day, and then about 25%, and then about 40% the day of. But that is definitely something to talk to your endocrinologist about. Me and my endocrinologist worked it out like really carefully. And it all depends on like your reaction of how you exercise. For me, that reduction worked really well. But the first time I went backpacking with Lantus, my reduction was not enough. I even cut it completely in half, and I still just kept going really, really low. So, but it definitely takes, and one other thing just about hiking is I always let someone know if I don't have a GPS tracker with me, if I'm just going on a day hike, I always let them know. And I think this is just a good general hiking rule, the trailhead when I get there and when I should be back. So that somebody always knows, hey, you should be back by this time. And I have someone on my Google tracker so they can see me at all times, but you know, you get up in those areas and you don't have cell phone signal. So that's something to be aware of. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing, both of you. I really appreciate you guys sharing your experiences. And we have some questions that have been submitted here, and I will read those off, and you can both, share as you see fit. If anyone in the audience does have any other questions, you can pop them in the chat, but it'll probably be easiest for us to track them if you put them into this Google form that I just linked into the chat for you all. And so the first question that we had submitted was, flying with diabetes supplies, do you need a doctor's note, or is it contingent on the country or area you are going?
Great question. I have, like I said, I've traveled so much internationally. And I think maybe 10 or 20 years ago, I used to always have a doctor's note. And then after 20 years and nobody ever looked at it, I just didn't ever bring it. So I do have the written prescriptions, which serve basically as a doctor's note, right? And they also serve as if I need to get supplies. However, so in my 12 country itinerary, I was advised that Japan, that there is some sort of paperwork and approval process that I was supposed to start a month before arriving in Japan, which I never made it to. And I talked to a type 1 who did this program the year before me. And he said, yeah, it's extensive paperwork. You got to follow, I did this and I did that. And I got my doctor to sign it. And then he said, when he arrived in Japan, nobody looked at it. But yes, if you're going to Japan, they do have rules. I'm not sure if they're enforced, but no, I've just always had, and back in the day before I lost my ID bracelet, I'd have an ID bracelet, but I just carry the prescriptions, and I feel like that covers it.
Great. How do you keep your insulin safe while you travel? I know you both touched on this a little bit, but is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
I can add just one thing to it. Through my travels, backpacking is the hardest to keep the insulin as cold, as refrigerator cold. Like I said, I stick it usually where my water bladder is. The other thing is, like, when I'm traveling, I have like a little case. I actually have it like right here. It looks like this. It looks like a little mini suitcase. And it has a cooler pack in it. This one's like from Diabetic. But it has like a cooler pack in it. So I just sometimes slide a really slim little cooler in it, and just, that's what I carry with me. And when I fly to, and also I've only ever taken a doctor's note once because they never looked at it, just to add to Jody's earlier point. But yeah, I always travel with the prescriptions. The other thing that I have done, I don't know for you, Jody, but for me, one of the things that I did to reduce my stress while flying is getting TSA pre-check. Just to, it's like $85 over 5 years. That might have changed in the past couple of years. But that is definitely one of the great things. It just speeds up the process, takes away some of that stress. I haven't had issues going through the scanners with it. Sometimes they see it and they want to have you pat it, and then they swab your hands. I did, when I was on an Omnipod, have a TSA agent like stop me and be like, this insulin pump is so cool, there's no tubing. Like, so I have, sometimes the TSA agents are like, oh, what is this? They get kind of fascinated by like what technology you're using. I've had the same questions about my Dexcom and things like that. So sometimes, like, it can be a scary situation sometimes going through TSA, but I found that, like, if you're super friendly about it and like kind of you just like, oh, open to some of their questions, they actually kind of are like, oh, okay. And they learn, and I feel like they become a little more open to kind of that situation. But most of the time they don't bother me, especially through TSA pre-check. So
and TSA pre-check doesn't work internationally.
that's why I knew it works for me domestically. That's why I was because I know it doesn't work internationally. Do you use global entry or anything? Do you know?
Well, I couldn't, because I was traveling with 30 people.
That makes sense.
So it's like everybody, we always got to the airport early, and we were always going to wait. And everyone's like, well, if you get through, you're just going to wait on the other side for all of us.
Yep.
So, but in terms of keeping the insulin cold, 40 years into having this, I've never really worried about it. The only thing I worry about is it not getting hot. As long as it doesn't get hot, I've never had a problem. So like I said, I the day I left Seattle a year ago, I put all my insulin, a year's worth of long acting, a year's worth of short acting into my carry-on. I had it with me at all times. I made sure that there was nothing hot. Like, I didn't put it above me, even, because I didn't know if it ever gets hot up there. And I checked on the floor, and I always get a window, and I made sure there's just no heat around anywhere. And then as soon as I arrived at wherever I was living for that month, I put everything in the fridge. And then if I'm at a beach or in a hot climate, it's always in my purse. Obviously, just the one rapid I'm using. Everything else, even the active long acting that I'm using and all my backup, is always in the fridge. One thing that is very scary when you're traveling is using fridges that could freeze things, like those little hotel fridges. Like that's what always freaks me out. So I actually if I have a kind of a wonky fridge, I'll not put anything in it for a day, because I want to get a sense of if it freezes the stuff that's in there when I arrive. And then I will, then I'll put it in. But I never worry about actually keeping it cold. Like you guys, I traveled with the Frio pouch. I still have the Frio pouch. I never used the Frio pouch. So, you know, I just, after 40 years of like trying to dot all my I's and cross all my T's, I've realized I don't really need to. But if I don't get it hot, I've never had a problem.
That note about the hotel, like mini fridges and stuff, so important. We actually, at our retreat last year, at the hotel and casino that we were staying at, someone's insulin froze in their mini fridge. Fortunately, they were at a retreat with, 100 other people with type 1 diabetes. And so we could very easily help them out. But I mean, it was just so, it was so sad, and definitely important to, I like that trick, words are hard, waiting a day to put anything in there to see how it reacts. I wouldn't have thought about that. That's great. Another question we got about airports and traveling, but there's one about traveling across time zones, and what that does for your management, and how does that have an effect on your blood glucose? What do you do for that?
Sure. Yeah. So this kind of level of education is what I love to do. I feel like us as type 1s, a lot of us, hopefully in the Seattle area, everybody's getting great care. But you guys know that nationwide and worldwide, so many people have no idea what they're doing. And they don't know how to change their basal rate. All they do is dose on carbs. They don't know anything about slow carbs or fast carbs or protein or fat. And that is why I've created my virtual business. Is I work with patients, I hold your hand and I walk you through, okay, let's become masters at knowing how to dose insulin properly so we don't worry about going low with exercise, so we can keep a flat line at night. And so we know how to adjust our insulin when we're traveling across time zones. So this is something I teach all the time. And obviously it's going to be bumpy because not only do you have, a different morning time, right? Your morning when you wake up, but of course your hormones, one of the, the whole reason when you have your pump, you have different basal rates through the day because your liver has that inherent different pattern of glucose release. Well, guess what? That's going to get completely, your day hormone release is completely different when you start going to bed at a different time and you wake up at a different time and your eyes see light at a different time. So I always tell people that, well, to be honest, it's kind of an easier adjustment for people on shots. Because if you're twice a day or once a day with your long acting, I'll say if you're 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., just immediately when you get there, do the 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. And there's one of two things that's going to happen. You're either going to have a longer 12 or 24 hour, time period, which then you're going to go high. So you might want to correct with some Humalog, or you're going to have a shorter one, which means you're going to have to be careful for going low. And so instead of like doing this stepwise, like, okay, change 4 hours one day and then change 4 hours one day, I'm just like, just jump in, do the same time when you arrive and just figure out, is that time period going to be more active? And I'll ask them there's a lot of patients I work with that are terrified of lows and they'd rather go high. So then we might even, extend it even more if it was, but anyways, that's kind of how when people are on shots. When people are on pumps, to be honest, if it depends on how long they're going for. If they're going for a weekend, I'll be like, you know what, don't change your basals. It's just going to be a bit of a mess. If you're flying 3 hours East Coast and then come back to Seattle, I'll be like, don't change your basals, but just be on your toes. You could do a temporary basal decrease if you're scared, if you don't, because, certain peaks of your basal rate. What if it peaks when you don't need it to peak, right? But hormones aren't going to switch in 3 days either. So, but if they're on a pump and they're going to be gone longer than 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days longer, then I will recommend that, again, once they get there, they're going to change the clock and hope that by 3 days in, the body's hormones are going to adjust. So I will just have them simply change the clock on their pump. And then again, in that window where it's kind of wonky, I'm like, you got to be ready for either highs or lows. And then, hopefully your body will pick up on its regular hormonal pattern by day 3. So those are my recommendations. Now, of course, when you're traveling, you also have to consider if you're sitting on your butt for a long time, you're going to need a temporary basal increase. Anytime our activity level goes below what is normal, we're going to have lower insulin sensitivity, and we're going to need a temporary basal increase. However, then you also have to consider when you're traveling, are you being more active? Are you eating less? Are you eating more? Are you excited? Are you nervous? Is your brain overworking? Because high brain work causes lows because it burns up. Your brain uses more glucose than any organ in the body. Hi, buddy. So there's so many variables when it comes to travel that people, you just kind of have to really be on your toes. And it depends if you have a more fear of highs or lows, which way you, take your precautions.
Great. Thank you for sharing those. So I want to go back to one, Andrea, that you mentioned a little bit when you were sharing some of your experiences, but we have it's kind of a 3-part question. But I'll start with the second part of it, which was, have you ever been in a particularly scary diabetes situation while traveling? And do you have concerns about being hospitalized while traveling? And either of you can answer.
Yeah, I can. I did have a scary diabetes situation. Actually, my first backpacking trip, I didn't quite, I was on Humalog pens, just a regular pens. Now I'm on an N pen, and Lantus at the time. And I went up through the enchantments. I've done it twice, and the first time was a little traumatic because we had worked out kind of how I would reduce my Lantus, but the work that we had to do to get up it's called Asgard Pass. It's not for the faint of heart. It is very, very hard. Again, looks cool on Instagram, but it is not faint of heart. The N pen is a smart insulin pen. I saw somebody ask. So this insulin pen Bluetooths to my phone, and it has like pump calculation ability. Pretty cool. N pen, so insulin pen. Yeah, pretty creative there with the name. But unfortunately, with about halfway through my backpacking, I had consumed about 200 grams of sugar to just keep my blood sugar above 70. So I travel with, I always backpack with, I got these from camp, the Transcend glucose gels, and now this is the only glucose gel I use. I actually had used all of my supplies, and by the time I got halfway through the hike, I had used over 200 grams of just these. The other thing I always have with me is dried fruit. I carry like mangoes are one of my favorites. The Trader Joe's mangoes, they're amazing. But the other thing that I always ask is my other backpackers to carry some things with them. And I learned from this lesson to always have your other backpackers also be carrying something, because I had wiped like 3/4 of my supplies. I taken all of my Transcend gels. And luckily my backpacking friends with them had dried fruit, but the problem was we were halfway through, and we still had another half of a very hard day. So unfortunately it was, and part of it we got lost. So I won't downplay it. It was very, very scary. I pretty much had to maintain to make sure that I could still kind of function. I just kind of actually maintained a blood sugar around 75, which is lower than what I like to be for hiking. And I would just to make my supplies last longer, because I was in such a remote area. So that was not a great experience. I learned the hard way, and the next time I went backpacking, I carried, in one day, I carry like 600 grams of sugar just in case. But I haven't had to, this last time that I did the same exact backpacking trip, I didn't have nearly the amount of trouble, because I had learned the hard way. But it was quite scary. But again, I was concerned about being hospitalized, but there are there were rangers everywhere. The rangers were actually aware of the situation because when I did have a low, right in this, it's called the core area of the enchantments. The rangers were aware that, hey, there's someone here with T1D that my blood sugar was, I think, 51 at the time. And again, had to consume a lot of sugar, but that's where it's important to travel again with that GPS, SOS thing. And the rangers also have one too. In some of those bigger areas, you'll see rangers around. I've never hiked through that area and not seen a ranger. So I think it's important just, and luckily, like I said, with the people I was traveling with, I said, hey, this is the situation. Everyone was like, okay, no one's going to eat anything with carbs or sugar that are in their packs. So just in case. So it sucks to carry how heavy these, like a whole gallon size Ziplocs full of these get very heavy. That is also why I like to use pixie sticks. And the other thing I like to use are the like fruit leathers because they're really skinny. So they don't take up too much space. And these are really good for, these ones are the Good and Gather from Target. These are really good because they are, I just eat them kind of in maintenance as well. And they taste good. And I can slide them like into a pocket really easy I love leggings with pockets. So my leggings will always have a bunch of these. So, yeah.
Excellent. Jody, did you have an experience to share on that question, or do we want to move on to the next one?
I really haven't ever in 40 years had a problem. There was one, I was backpacking in Australia. So that was probably, I was 20 something, 24, 23. And we rented a Jeep and we were on a 100-mile island made of sand. That was it. It was just sand and trees and lakes. And I was traveling by myself. So the people on the Jeep, we just all kind of met at a hostel and we decided it was a thing, like rent a Jeep and drive on the 100-mile sand island and then go camping there for 3 days. Right. So basically for 3-4 days, I'm on this island of sand, driving in a Jeep with, 5 people that I don't really know. And we're driving and we're exploring and we're going to lakes and we're driving along the beach and we're, driving through the forest, but still in sand. And at one point I just got sick of being on the Jeep and I was like, isn't our campsite like right up ahead the road? And they're like, yeah, it's, according to our map, right? It's just like around the corner. And I was like, okay, I'm just like, because the Jeep was really bouncy, right? So I was like, I'm just going to jump out and, I'm just going to walk. And there was 2 other guys that like jumped out and walked. Well, I didn't bring anything with me. Not one thing. Because I thought camp was around the corner. I was like, I'm just going to get out, walk a mile and I'll see you guys there. So, that was, now I would never get out, I don't think, of any situation without glucose on me. But anyways, we were walking in sand for 3 hours and it was getting dark. And I was like, I cannot keep walking because I'm burning up too much sugar. So I'm going to sit down. And if nobody comes by, this is where I'll be. Like, I didn't want to, if I could, so I just sat down in the sand and I was like, if I keep walking, I could die. So I'm not going to walk anymore. I'm just going to sit here. And sure enough, I don't know, maybe another hour comes by and a car came by and then picked us up and, drove us, which was a very long drive still, to our campsite. So that was just my ignorance, right? And just over trusting. It wasn't really a problem. I mean, it was obviously, but yeah, that was the only time that I was like, yeah, so I'm in the wilderness. I have no sugar on me and no supplies. And I'm just chilling here in the sand with 2 strangers.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. All right, we have time for one more question. And this one is about managing and bolusing for unfamiliar foods while you're traveling. How do you do that?
Sure. I'm happy to answer that. So This is what I teach everybody. First of all, is I have a whole course that's called Mealtime Dosing, Why Carb Counting Isn't Enough. And so the first thing is we have to analyze, is it fast carbs or slow carbs? And then we have to analyze how much protein and fat do we think is in the meal. So even if we don't recognize the food, we can generally pick up, is this, how much protein is this? Is this fatty? Is this carby? Right? And so we use all of those thoughts to then do a conservative pre-dose. So I always say, figure out what your range is. If you think this is a 2-unit or a 4-unit meal, and then just start with your 2. And then use your DEX to cover. And frankly, if it's high protein and high fat, I always tell people to use extended bolus or microdose on shots anyways. So yeah, just figure out your range, you know, have a couple bites of it, figure it out, and then pre-dose your conservative amount, and then use your DEX. Now, one of my favorite things, of course, is also to use exercise and walking. So if I'm going high after any meal, right, if you have insulin on board, go for a 10-minute walk before you correct and see how much that 10-minute walk kicks your insulin in. And then you can correct more confidently. Because if your 10-minute walk and, you know, if you just see the arrow still going up, well, 10 minutes isn't really fast enough for DEX to respond. So I generally have people be a little bit more patient than that. But the concept is, you know, if you're not sure you're going to correct, if you do a conservative dose and then maybe an hour after a meal, you're going up. If you want to give yourself more, if it's a high protein and high fat meal, I always give yourself more because that demands a longer dose anyways. And, you know, even if I'm normal an hour later after a high protein, high fat meal, I'll dose more because the protein and fat are not done. And I also think about how much insulin, if I'm in terms of correcting, if I gave myself a 2-unit pre-dose and I'm high, I'll definitely correct because 2 units doesn't have much staying power, even if it says, you know, you have X insulin on board. But if I give myself like a 5-unit pre-dose, then obviously I'm going to be way more conservative about correcting. But to be honest, every meal, in my opinion, is foreign foods because every day is so different. And so this is how I dose all the time. I do a conservative pre-dose. I use intramuscular shots to make my insulin work faster and to correct highs. And I do most of my shots right here because then I don't have to actually pre-dose because it works so fast. And your peak is faster, but your timeline is faster. It'll go into your system faster and it'll get out of your system faster. So I like to correct with IM shots. But that's just kind of how I dose every day.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to both of you, Jody and Andee, for joining us and for sharing your experiences with us. I'm so grateful, and I hope that you both can get back to more travels again, and Jody getting back to traveling the world again soon. And again, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it, and we hope that you all have a great day.